The Great Pyramid aligns with true north within a fraction of a single degree. How did ancient engineers achieve near-perfect astronomical alignments without modern instruments? This video reveals the 12 ingenious methods they used to harmonize stone with the cosmos. You will learn how cultures from Egypt to the Americas turned simple shadows, stars, and ropes into a precise science that still challenges our understanding. We will uncover how they tracked the sun's slow dance across the horizon for years, and why some temples seem to capture moonlight only once in a generation. What forgotten form of genius does our reliance on technology prevent us from seeing today? Picture a person standing alone on a vast, open plain, day after day, year after year. Their only task is to watch. They watch where the sun first cracks the horizon at dawn. They note the exact point where it disappears at dusk. They track how these points of light and shadow creep slowly along the rim of the world with the passing seasons. This was not an act of idle curiosity. It was the first and most vital profession of the ancient world, the astronomer priest. Their instrument was nothing more than the human eye, calibrated by a lifetime of patient attention. Across continents and cultures, from the deserts of Egypt to the highlands of Peru, this practice formed the bedrock of all that would follow. As the scholar Anthony Aveni reminds us, the sky was far more than a beautiful display. For these early watchers, it was a perfect, predictable clock. It was a sprawling calendar that dictated when to plant and when to harvest. It was an unerring compass that could guide you across trackless seas or deserts. This deep, generational familiarity with the heavens allowed them to identify celestial anchor points, moments of profound stability in the apparent chaos. The most critical of these were the solstices and equinoxes. The summer solstice marks the sun's northernmost rise, the longest day. The winter solstice is its southernmost rise, the shortest day. The equinoxes, midway between, are the 2 days of perfect balance, when light and dark are equal. By patiently observing the sun's path shift between these extreme points over many years, these sky watchers could pinpoint these days with astonishing accuracy. They did not need advanced mathematics. They needed a horizon and a memory. They would select a distant, permanent natural feature, like a distinctive mountain peak or a notch between 2 hills. When the sun rose or set directly in line with that feature, they knew a significant celestial event was occurring. This simple act of lining up a celestial body with a terrestrial landmark is the seed from which all monumental alignment grows. It is the translation of cosmic time into earthly space, a map written not on parchment but on the land itself. This foundational knowledge, passed down through generations of watchful eyes, was the indispensable first step. It transformed the sky from a mystery into a measurable, reliable guide. But knowing where the sun would be was only half the challenge. The next, far more difficult step was transferring that perfect celestial line onto the chaotic, uneven ground below. How do you take a vision written in light and faithfully carve it into stone? A single vertical pole planted in the earth transforms sunlight into a cosmic pen. This tool, the Gnomon, was the first true scientific instrument. Its long, creeping shadow did more than tell time. It drew a perfect map of the sun's journey across the sky. The process was one of profound patience. An ancient surveyor would establish a flat, level area of ground and set a gnomon firmly at its center. Around this pole, they would draw a large, precise circle in the dust or mark it with stones. Then the real work began. As the sun moved, the shadow's tip would trace a curved path outside this circle. The observer's task was simple yet meticulous. They would mark the exact point where that shadow tip touched the circle at different intervals. By connecting these dots over the course of a day, they created a distinct, arcing shadow path. The shape of this path held the secrets of the cosmos. On an ordinary day, the arc would be curved, but on the equinoxes something magical happened. The shadow path became a perfectly straight line, running precisely east to west. This was a moment of celestial balance, captured in dirt and shadow. The solstices revealed themselves in the shadow's extremes. The tip of the shadow at sunrise on the summer solstice would touch the circle at its farthest northern point. At sunset on the winter solstice, it would touch at the farthest southern point. By marking these two extreme points over successive years, they could bisect the angle between them to find a true east-west line. Finding true north was even more elegant. They would watch for the moment each day when the shadow was at its absolute shortest. This occurred at solar noon, when the sun reached its highest point in the sky. That shortest shadow, pointing directly away from the sun, gave them a flawless north-south meridian line. This is almost certainly how the builders of the Great Pyramid achieved their legendary alignment. Scholars like Kate Spence have proposed that they would have tracked the shadow of a central gnomon over many months, perhaps even years, patiently marking the solstice extremes and the daily noon minimum. By doing so, they could establish a foundational north-south axis accurate to within 1/15th of a single degree. Think about that for a moment. With nothing but a stick, a circle, and relentless observation, they translated the grand, abstract motions of a star 93 million miles away into a perfectly oriented line on the ground. This was not magic. It was a geometry written by light itself, a language the ancients learned to read with breathtaking skill. The gnomon proved that the universe was not chaotic but orderly, and that its order could be measured with the humblest of tools. Yet, while the sun provided a daily rhythm, the night sky offered a different kind of clock, one that moved with a slower, more majestic patience. While the gnomon captured the sun's daily arc, a different kind of observation offered even greater precision. This second method focused not on the horizon at dawn or dusk, but on the sun's highest, most commanding moment. Ancient engineers learned to harness the meridian line, the imaginary north-south arc that passes directly overhead from one pole to the other. At the precise instant of solar noon, when the sun reaches its culmination in the sky, it crosses this meridian. Its shadow is at its absolute shortest and points directly along a true north-south axis. To capture this moment, they would first establish a long, straight baseline on the ground, perhaps a carefully dug trench or a tautly stretched cord, oriented as close to north-south as their preliminary observations allowed. Then the waiting began. Day after day, they would watch a vertical marker, like a precisely set stone or a weighted plumb line. They were waiting for that singular moment when the sun's shadow aligned perfectly with the prepared baseline. When the shadow fell directly along the trench or cord, with no deviation to the east or west, they had captured the meridian crossing. This method had a brilliant advantage over horizon observations. Watching the sun rise or set means looking through the thickest part of Earth's atmosphere, which bends the light, a phenomenon called atmospheric refraction. This can make the sun appear slightly higher than it truly is, throwing off alignments by a small but meaningful amount. By observing the sun at its zenith, high in a thinner atmosphere, this distortion is minimized, yielding a cleaner, more accurate reference line. The Inca of the Andes Mountains perfected this principle with structures known as sucancas. These were not just simple pillars, but carefully placed towers or aligned stone columns that created long, straight sightlines across the landscape. On certain critical days of the year, when the sun passed directly overhead at noon, it would shine perfectly down the length of these stone channels, casting no shadow at all. This Zenith Sun event was a cornerstone of their calendar, signaling times for planting, harvest, and ceremony. The process required immense patience and repeated verification. An engineer might mark the tip of a shadow at solar noon for many days in a row. The shadow would be slightly longer one day, slightly shorter the next, tracing a shallow arc. The very shortest shadow in that series marked the true solar noon for that location, and its direction was a flawless north-south line. This shift from watching the sun's edges at the horizon to tracking its peak at the zenith represents a profound leap in understanding. It shows ancient astronomers thinking in 3 dimensions, grasping the sun's full path across the dome of the sky. They moved from marking where the sun appeared and vanished to pinpointing its most powerful, definitive station directly above them. It was a geometry of supreme confidence, waiting for the cosmos to declare its alignment in a moment of shadowless perfection. Yet the sun was only one reference point in a sky filled with guiding lights. When darkness fell, an even more stable and ancient clockwork emerged from the velvet black. The night sky offered a far more stable reference than the shifting horizon. While the sun's path changes daily, certain stars appear to rotate around a fixed, unmoving point in the heavens, the celestial pole. Ancient cultures, from the builders of Stonehenge to the astronomers of ancient China, learned to use these circumpolar stars as a perfect, eternal compass. They identified 2 bright stars that never dipped below the horizon, circling the pole like sentinels. By observing these stars at their highest and lowest points in their nightly rotation, or by using a simple sighting tool like a forked stick or a pair of aligned stones, they could determine true north with extraordinary precision. This stellar method was immune to the seasonal wobbles of the sun, providing a constant, unwavering guide. It allowed for alignments that remained true for centuries, a testament to looking beyond our own solar system for a fixed point in the turning cosmos. Yet, this grand celestial navigation still required a way to bring that star-fixed direction down to Earth, to translate the perfect geometry of the sky into the rough reality of the building site. That translation required a tool of beautiful simplicity, one that could turn a vision into a straight line. The true north line derived from the sun's shadow still needed to be etched permanently into the earth. For this, the ancient engineers turned to a tool of profound simplicity, the humble rope. But this was no ordinary cord. It was a precision instrument transformed by a principle known as the 3-4-5 triangle. Picture a single, long rope. By tying knots at regular intervals along its length, a surveyor could create a giant, flexible measuring tape. To form a perfect right angle, the cornerstone of all their geometry, they would use a loop of this knotted rope. They would stake one knot into the ground as a fixed point. Then, stretching the rope taut, they would count out 3 equal units along one leg and 4 units along the other. When the distance between the ends of these 2 legs measured exactly 5 units, they had achieved a flawless 90-degree angle. This Pythagorean triplet, understood millennia before the Greek philosopher gave it his name, was the secret to squaring massive foundations. A master builder could take this rope triangle, scale it up to any size needed, and project perfectly perpendicular lines across a construction site. It was how they extended that celestial north-south meridian into a full square or rectangle, ensuring that every corner was true. This method was almost certainly used at Giza and in countless other ancient sites. The rope was their ruler, their protractor, and their guarantee of geometric purity. It translated the abstract lines of the sky into the rigid, earthly framework of stone. Yet, even with perfect right angles, another challenge remained. How do you maintain that sacred orientation while constructing a monument that might take decades, even generations, to complete? The alignment could not drift by a single finger's width. The uneven, jagged horizon of a natural landscape was a constant source of error for ancient sky watchers. A distant mountain peak might seem like a perfect marker, but over many miles, even a slight irregularity could throw an alignment off by a full degree or more. The solution they devised was as brilliant as it was simple: eliminate the horizon entirely. The 4th method involved creating an artificial, perfectly flat plane right at their feet, using the oldest level known to humankind, water. By digging a long, straight trench and filling it with water, or by constructing a stone basin and keeping its surface meticulously still, engineers created an impeccable horizontal line. This calm, reflective pool became a new kind of observing platform. Instead of sighting a star as it physically touched a distant hill, they could watch for the moment its bright reflection touched the edge of the water's surface in their basin. This technique effectively doubled their accuracy. It removed the variable of a bumpy, unreliable land horizon and replaced it with a flawless geometric plane. Some researchers, like engineer Glenn Dash, have proposed that the builders of the Great Pyramid may have used such water-filled trenches during their foundational layout. The concept is elegant. A surveyor would align a sighting staff with the reflection of a key star in the water, knowing that the angle of reflection equals the angle of incidence. This principle of optics, understood intuitively long before it was formalized in equations, turned a simple pool into a precision instrument. The innovation did not stop with water. Highly polished surfaces of metal, or even volcanic glass like obsidian, could have served as mirrors to catch and redirect celestial light. A carefully angled sheet of burnished copper, for instance, could capture the first ray of the solstice sun and project a brilliant spot of light onto a specific mark on a temple wall deep inside a shrouded chamber. This transforms alignment from a passive act of observation into an active, dramatic event, where light itself is summoned and directed to announce a sacred date. This method reveals a profound leap in technical thinking. It shows ancient engineers were not just observers of the natural world, but active manipulators of it. They understood that to achieve perfection, they sometimes had to build their own piece of a perfect world, a miniature, controlled cosmos of still water and reflected light, to better commune with the grand one above. Yet, even with a perfectly level horizon, another fundamental challenge remained: how to guarantee that the massive stone blocks themselves were laid perfectly flat and true, so the entire structure would not slowly twist and warp over centuries of construction. But a perfect line on the ground is useless if the foundation itself is crooked. The monumental challenge was transferring that celestial blueprint onto a vast, uneven construction site. The solution was found not in stone but in fiber. The ancient world's most precise surveying tool was a length of rope. In Egypt, they were known as the harpedonapti, the rope stretchers. These were not laborers but master geometers. Their craft was an applied science of knots and tension. By tying knots at meticulously spaced intervals along a long cord, they created a giant, flexible measuring tape. But their true genius was in how they used that rope to generate perfect geometry. They understood a profound secret, that a triangle with sides in the specific ratio of 3, 4, and 5 units will always contain a perfect right angle. This is the famous 3-4-5 triangle, a Pythagorean triple known and used millennia before the philosopher Pythagoras was born. The process was beautifully practical. To square the corner of a massive pyramid base, a rope stretcher would stake one knot into the ground at the desired corner point. One assistant would pull the rope taut along one leg for a distance of 3 units. A second assistant would pull another section taut for 4 units along the other leg. Then, they would adjust the angle between these 2 legs until the distance between the ends measured exactly 5 units. When that 5th knot aligned, they had locked in a flawless 90-degree angle. This empirical knowledge, born from generations of laying out fields and building altars, was the cornerstone of sacred architecture. They could scale this rope triangle up to any size imaginable, projecting perfectly perpendicular lines across acres of bedrock. It was this method that allowed them to extend a single north-south meridian, derived from the stars or the Gnomon's shadow, into the immense, perfect square of the Great Pyramid's base. This was not abstract mathematics for its own sake. It was mathematics in service of the cosmos. The same principles echo across the world. In ancient India, texts called the Sulba Sutras provide detailed instructions for using ropes and pegs to construct complex ceremonial altars with precise astronomical orientations. The geometry was a ritual act, a way of weaving cosmic order into a physical space. The rope was the literal bridge between sky and earth. It translated the invisible lines connecting stars into tangible, measurable distances on the ground. With a stretched cord and a handful of knots, the grand, untouchable harmony of the heavens could be walked, measured, and finally built in stone. Yet, even with a perfectly squared foundation rising from the desert, a final, more elusive challenge awaited. How could they ensure that every single layer of stone, added over decades, remained perfectly aligned to the original celestial blueprint? The structure could not slowly twist toward the sun like a growing plant. The sun is a wanderer, never appearing in the same place twice. If you were to photograph its position at the same exact moment each day for an entire year, you would not see a straight line, but a graceful, elongated figure 8 traced against the sky. This celestial path is known as the Analemma, and its discovery represents a pinnacle of ancient patience. To map it required a fifth, profoundly long-term method, one that turned a single observer's lifetime into a single data point. This was not about catching a moment, but about documenting a slow, majestic cycle. Dedicated sky watchers, often part of a sustained priestly class, would return to the same observation point day after day, year after year. They would note the precise notch on the horizon where the first sliver of sun broke free at dawn. Over the seasons, they watched this point of light march northward along the horizon until it reached a limit at the summer solstice. Then it would pause, reverse, and journey south to its opposite limit at the winter solstice. By placing permanent stone markers at these two extreme northern and southern sunrise points, they captured the boundaries of the sun's annual journey. The true power of this map lay in its midpoint. Once the solstice extremes were fixed, finding due east for the equinoxes became a simple act of geometry. The exact center point between the two solstice markers would point unerringly to where the sun rises on the 2 days of perfect balance. This is the genius hidden within sites like Stonehenge. The famous heel stone, Standing Chinese letter outside the main circle, aligns with the summer solstice sunrise. Other stones within the complex likely marked the winter solstice sunset. These were not arbitrary monuments, they were permanent pages in a stone calendar recording the sun's farthest travels. Understanding the Analemma transformed astronomy from simple observation into a predictive science. By knowing the sun's path, they could anticipate its return. They could declare with certainty when the days would begin to lengthen again after the deep dark of winter, a moment of immense cultural and agricultural importance. This long-term tracking required a societal commitment that spanned generations, a living tradition where knowledge was passed like a sacred torch. It shows us that their precision was not a lucky guess, but the accumulated reward of countless sunrises, witnessed and recorded by countless watchful eyes. They understood time not as a straight line, but as a grand, cyclical dance, and they built their world to harmonize with its every step. Yet, tracking the sun's horizontal journey was only one dimension of their understanding. To achieve true alignment, they also had to master the vertical dimension, the precise height of a star or the sun's altitude above the horizon. This demanded a tool that could measure angles as accurately as a modern theodolite. The cosmos provided the angles, but to measure them required an instrument of equal elegance. This sixth method moved beyond ropes and shadows to a tool that could capture the precise altitude of a star, the Merkhet. Used in ancient Egypt, the Merkhet was a simple sighting bar with a plumb line hanging from its center. An observer would hold it level and look along its edge, aligning it with a specific star just as it crossed an imaginary north-south meridian in the sky. The hanging plumb line, swaying freely, would then indicate the exact angle of that star's ascent on a graduated scale. This allowed for astonishingly precise measurements, enabling the Egyptians to track the slow precession of the stars over centuries. It was a handheld observatory, turning the arm and eye into a living theodolite. With it, they could verify their foundational alignments year after year, generation after generation, ensuring that the slow creep of celestial time did not distort the eternal message set in stone. This tool represents a shift from empirical observation to repeatable, instrument-based measurement, a cornerstone of true engineering. Yet, while instruments like the Merkhet captured precise moments, the greatest alignments often required planning for events that would not occur for decades or even centuries. This demands a seventh method, one of staggering foresight, where the blueprint was written not for the builders but for their distant descendants. Even the most stable stars are not truly fixed. Our planet itself moves with a slow, majestic wobble, like a spinning top beginning to tire. This imperceptible drift, called the precession of the equinoxes, completes one full cycle every 26,000 years. Over a single human lifetime, its effect is negligible, a shift smaller than the width of the full moon, but over centuries it rewrites the night sky. The pole star changes. The constellations marking the equinoxes slide backward through the zodiac. An alignment to a specific star that was perfect on the day a temple's cornerstone was laid would, over generations, become a memory etched in misaligned stone. This was perhaps the ultimate test of ancient astronomical knowledge. It asked a profound question: could they perceive a change so slow it was invisible to any individual? Evidence suggests they could, and they did. At sites like the Egyptian temple complex of Karnak, archaeologists see not a single, frozen alignment, but a story written in stone and shifted foundations. Successive pharaohs expanded and rebuilt halls, sometimes adjusting the axes of new constructions by tiny amounts. Scholars like the Egyptologist Sir Norman Lockyer, studying these temples in the late 19th century, proposed that these were not arbitrary changes. They were deliberate corrections, an attempt by later generations to realign their sacred architecture with a sky that had subtly drifted since their ancestors first built there. This implies a breathtaking continuity of observation. Priestly castes would have maintained precise records, not just for years, but for centuries, comparing the sunrise position on a solstice against the notches in a temple doorway their great-great-grandfathers had carved. When the slit of light no longer fell perfectly on the sacred altar, they knew it was time to rebuild, to nudge the stone back into harmony with the cosmos. This long-term vigilance transforms our understanding of their achievement. Their alignments were not simply set and forgotten. They were living relationships with the heavens, maintained across generations through meticulous record-keeping and a willingness to alter even monumental stone to preserve a celestial truth. It reveals a culture thinking in scales of time that dwarf our own, planning not for a decade but for a millennium. They were not just building for their present, but calibrating their world for a future they would never see. A plumb line hanging from a simple wooden bar could hold the key to aligning a pyramid. While ancient cultures never possessed telescopes, they were masterful engineers of basic sighting tools. These instruments did not magnify the heavens, they instead magnified human precision. By providing a stable, repeatable frame of reference, they transformed a fleeting observation into a permanent instruction for the masons waiting below. The Egyptian Merkhet is a perfect example of this elegant principle. It consisted of a central bar with a plumb line suspended from its midpoint. An astronomer priest, known as a hour watcher, would use it at night. He would sight along the bar's edge, aligning it with a specific star as it crossed the invisible north-south meridian overhead. The freely hanging plumb line, unaffected by the observer's own unsteadiness, would then point to a precise mark on a graduated scale, recording the exact altitude of that star at that moment. This single tool allowed them to track the slow drift of stars across centuries with astonishing consistency. ensuring their celestial alignments remained true across generations of construction. It was a handheld observatory, turning the human arm into a living, breathing theodolite. This same desire for stable reference points drove innovation across the ancient world. The Roman surveyors, tasked with carving straight roads and perfectly square cities across an empire, relied on the groma. This device featured a cross of arms suspended from a vertical staff, with a plumb line hanging from the end of each arm. By sighting across the aligned pairs of dangling weights, a surveyor could project flawlessly straight lines and perfect right angles across miles of rugged terrain. It was the tool that laid the grid of civilization onto the wild landscape. Meanwhile, in China, the basic Gnomon evolved into breathtakingly complex models of the cosmos itself. The armillary sphere was a skeletal globe of interconnected rings, each representing a key celestial circle like the equator or the path of the sun. By aligning this physical model with the actual sky, astronomers could predict movements and pinpoint alignments with a new level of theoretical understanding. The profound leap here is not in complexity but in repeatability. A priest using a Merkhet could teach an apprentice the exact method. A surveyor with a groma could guarantee that every team on every section of a long wall was working from the same unwavering line. These tools minimized the tiny, cumulative errors that could, over the length of a massive foundation, result in a disastrous misalignment. They provided a shared language of accuracy, a bridge between the visionary astronomer and the practical stonecutter. This technological step, from naked eye observation to instrument-assisted measurement, marks the crucial transition from watching the sky to commanding the Earth. It meant the perfect angle envisioned at dawn could be faithfully reproduced at noon and again the next year by different hands. The cosmos gave the blueprint, but these simple tools gave them the power to build it. Yet, even with perfect instruments, the greatest challenge often lay in the sheer scale of time itself, demanding a plan that stretched far beyond a single human life. The blueprint for a pyramid is useless if the master builder cannot remember where to place the cornerstone. In a world before widespread writing, the most complex astronomical knowledge did not reside on clay tablets, but in the minds of people. It was carried in the rhythm of chants, the structure of stories, and the rigorous training of memory. This was the 12th method, the living library of oral tradition and mnemonic devices. For non-literate societies across the globe, this was not a primitive alternative to writing. It was a sophisticated, dynamic, and remarkably durable information technology. Consider the Polynesian voyagers who navigated the vast Pacific Ocean by reading the stars, winds, and waves. Their star compasses were not physical objects, but mental maps preserved in elaborate chants called kepu. These chants listed the precise rising and setting points of key stars for different seasons and islands. A master navigator would learn these chants by heart, often from childhood, linking each star's position to a sequence of words, rhythms, and even hand gestures. This encoded data allowed him to hold a celestial map in his mind, steering his canoe across thousands of miles of open ocean to find a tiny island. The chant was both the instruction manual and the verification tool, a rhythmic checklist repeated under the very stars it described. In ancient Europe, the knowledge required to use sites like Stonehenge was likely preserved in a similar way. The Druidic orders, as described by later classical writers, underwent decades of rigorous training, memorizing vast amounts of lore concerning the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. The solstice alignment was not just a date on a calendar, it was a story. It was a myth about a hero or a god whose journey mirrored the sun's path, with specific stones in the circle representing key characters or events in that story. To know the myth was to know the alignment. This method of encoding, where complex data is attached to vivid narrative or symbolic imagery, is a powerful mnemonic device. It is far easier to remember that the sun god's chariot strikes the heel stone on the longest day than to recall an abstract azimuth angle of 51 degrees. These stories and songs created a living database, one that was constantly refined and verified by each generation. An elder would take an apprentice to the site at dawn on the winter solstice. They would watch the sunrise, and the elder would recite the corresponding chant or story. If the light did not behave as the tradition said it should, the knowledge itself could be questioned and subtly adjusted. This created a self-correcting system of observation and memory. The durability of this system is its greatest testament. It ensured that critical engineering data, the very alignments that defined sacred spaces and agricultural cycles, could survive intact for centuries, even millennia, without a single written word. The stones were the permanent, silent markers, but the knowledge of how to read them and why they were placed lived and breathed in the voices of the people. This reveals the intellectual backbone of these ancient projects. The precision we see in stone was first achieved and faithfully maintained in the disciplined human mind. It was a collaboration across time where each generation became a link in a chain of memory, passing the celestial blueprint forward on a current of song and story. While the sun's path was a reliable annual rhythm, the moon danced to a far more intricate beat. Its movements across the sky are a masterpiece of celestial complexity, governed by a grand cycle that takes 18.6 years to complete. This is the cycle of the major lunar standstill, the seventh and perhaps most demanding method of ancient alignment. Twice in this long period, the moon reaches its extreme northern and southern rising and setting points on the horizon, points far beyond where the sun ever travels. To capture this moment in stone required a patience that spanned a human generation. The Callanish stones, standing like frozen giants on the Isle of Lewis in Scotland, are a silent testament to this generational watch. Their slender pillars are arranged to frame the dramatically low sweep of the moon at its southern major standstill, when it seems to skim the distant hills before vanishing. To establish such an alignment, an astronomer would have to begin observations as a young apprentice and continue them into middle age, meticulously noting the moon's slow creep along the horizon year after year. This was not a task for a lone stargazer, it was a project for a culture. It implies a formalized, sacred duty to pass precise records from elder to youth, a chain of knowledge that could not afford a single broken link. The ritual significance of such alignments was profound. Some researchers suggest that understanding this extreme lunar cycle provided a key to predicting eclipses, those awe-inspiring moments when the sun and moon briefly converge. Others link it to cycles of fertility and renewal in the natural world, seeing the moon's long journey as a celestial metaphor for life, death, and rebirth. Whatever its purpose, aligning with the lunar standstill represents the ultimate test of ancient astronomical dedication. It showcases a society thinking in timescales that embraced the full arc of a human life, planning monuments not for themselves but for their grandchildren. It reveals a sophistication that moves beyond mere calendar keeping into the realm of deep cosmic pattern recognition, where the slowest, most subtle dance in the heavens was not only noticed but commemorated in everlasting stone. This long-term vigilance hints at a profound truth. Their greatest structures were not just aligned to the sky, they were aligned to time itself. The stone itself was never the final goal. For the ancient world, a perfect alignment was far more than a triumph of engineering. It was a direct conversation with the divine, a physical proof of a sacred contract. This fusion of astronomy, religion, and political power was the invisible force that made such staggering precision possible. The technical methods we have explored were not developed in a vacuum. They were the sacred tools of a society that saw no separation between the laws of the cosmos and the laws of the state. A king or pharaoh did not merely build a temple aligned to the solstice sun. He demonstrated that he could command it. On that one morning each year, when the first beam of light would pierce the long, dark corridor of his sanctuary to illuminate the statue of a god. It was not an accident of architecture. It was a public, undeniable miracle. It was the heavens themselves endorsing his right to rule. In Egypt, the pharaoh was the living son of Ra, the sun god. The pyramid, with its flawless northern alignment and its slopes pointing toward the imperishable stars, was not just a tomb. It was a machine for resurrection, a ramp of stone designed to launch his soul directly into the cosmic order he represented on Earth. The precision was a theological necessity. A misaligned pyramid would be a broken ladder, a failed promise to the gods. In Mesopotamia, the massive step temples known as ziggurats served a similar profound purpose. Their name literally means to build high. They were artificial mountains, bridges between the realm of humans and the realm of the gods. The priest-king would ascend their levels to perform rituals at the summit, aligning his prayers with the movements of the planets that were seen as deities walking the sky. The act of measuring the stars was therefore an act of piety. The engineers who calculated the angles were often the priests who performed the ceremonies. Their blueprints were considered divinely inspired, received through careful observation of a heaven they believed was actively communicating. This spiritual imperative solved the greatest practical challenge of all, sustaining focus and resources. A project like the Great Pyramid required the coordinated labor of thousands for decades. Why would a society commit so much? It was not for vanity, but for survival. A perfectly aligned monument ensured the gods' favor, which meant predictable floods, bountiful harvests, and stability for the kingdom. The geometric idealism was driven by a desperate and beautiful hope to lock their world into the eternal, benevolent rhythm of the universe. The drive for perfection was at its heart a form of worship. It transformed a construction site into a temple, a surveyor's line into a prayer, and a block of stone into a permanent covenant between earth and sky. This deep fusion of purpose is what granted these projects their timeless authority. It also raises a haunting question for our own time, separated as we are by layers of technology from the raw heavens. Can we even comprehend the visceral conviction, the lived certainty, that the stars were not just distant balls of gas, but active, watching intelligences whose alignment was a matter of literal life and death? That conviction was the true compass behind every measurement they ever made. Symmetry was their secret weapon against error. The eighth method harnessed a powerful geometric truth that the perfect answer often lies precisely between two imperfect guesses. This is the principle of bisection, a technique of elegant simplicity that transformed rough observations into precise alignments. Imagine an ancient surveyor on a clear, level plane. His task is to find a perfect east-west line, the sacred axis upon which a temple will rise. He does not need to wait for an equinox or track the sun for years. Instead, he chooses any ordinary day. At dawn, he carefully marks the exact point on the horizon where the sun's first sliver appears. He does the same at dusk, marking where the last fragment of light vanishes. These 2 points are not perfectly opposite each other because the sun's path across the sky is an arc, not a straight line overhead, but the genius lies in what he does next. He measures the angle between those 2 marks, the sunrise and sunset points. Then he finds the exact midpoint, bisecting that angle. That midpoint line points unerringly to true east and west. It works because the sun's daily journey is symmetrical around the north-south meridian. By using 2 observations from opposite sides of the sky and averaging them, the method automatically cancels out small errors. A slight misjudgment at sunrise is compensated for by a similar misjudgment at sunset. The truth emerges from the balance, the same beautiful logic applied to finding north at night. An observer would track a bright circumpolar star, one that never sets. They would mark its position at its furthest point east in the sky, and then hours later, mark its furthest point west. The line that bisected the angle between these two extreme points pointed directly to the celestial North Pole. This was not about catching a star at a single, perfect moment, which could be fraught with error. It was about mapping the boundaries of its entire visible journey and letting the center point reveal the hidden, fixed pole around which everything turned. This technique of bisection is written into the bones of countless ancient sites. The profound symmetry seen in the layouts of Maya plazas, Egyptian temple complexes, or the great ceremonial centers of the Indus Valley was not merely an artistic choice. It was often the direct physical outcome of this fundamental surveying practice. The central axis of a city, the perfect rectangle of a foundation, the opposing gates of a fortress, all could spring from this act of finding the center between two extremes. It represents a leap in abstract thinking. They understood that the answer they sought was not necessarily something they could see directly, like a star touching a mountain. It was an invisible, geometric truth that could be mathematically derived from what they could see. It was a move from observation to calculation, from watching the sky to reasoning with it. This method gave them a powerful tool for verification and correction. If a single measurement seemed off, they could take its opposite, find the bisector, and trust the result more than either individual observation. In a world without digital precision, this geometric averaging was their algorithm for accuracy, a quiet testament to the power of human intellect to find order in the beautiful imperfections of the natural world. A celestial blueprint is powerless against a slanted floor. The most perfect alignment to a star would be rendered meaningless if the foundation upon which it was built tilted even by a hair's breadth. Before a single stone could be set for a pyramid or a temple, the ancient engineers faced a monumental terrestrial challenge, creating a perfectly level plane, often across acres of uneven bedrock. Their solution reveals a mastery of practical physics as profound as their understanding of the stars. The Egyptians likely employed one of the most elegant tools imaginable, turning the landscape itself into a precision instrument. They would cut a grid of shallow trenches across the entire building site, then fill them with water. Water, they understood, always finds its own level. By ensuring the water surface touched a consistent mark on the sides of every trench, they could guarantee that the entire excavated area was flat to within a fraction of an inch. This network of trenches acted as a giant, interconnected spirit level, scaling a simple principle to an architectural wonder. Any high point of bedrock would be painstakingly cut down, any low point filled, until the water told them the surface was true. This was not a quick process. It was an act of relentless, meticulous preparation that could take years. But it created the only canvas worthy of their cosmic art, an absolutely horizontal plane from which all vertical measurements could rise with perfect integrity. Across the ocean, the Inca of the Andes achieved a similar feat through a different, equally brilliant method. In the dizzying slopes of Machu Picchu and other mountain sites, they constructed vast terraces and foundations without a drop of mortar. Their dry stone masonry is a legend for a reason. Each stone was shaped with such exactitude that it fit perfectly with its neighbors, locked in place by gravity and geometry alone. To achieve a level surface on a steep hillside, they first built deep retaining walls, then filled the space behind them with layer upon layer of crushed stone, gravel, and soil for drainage. The final course of paving stones was then set with such care, likely checked with simple water levels or weighted cords, that the resulting plaza or platform was flawlessly flat. This ground-level precision was the silent, unsung hero of every alignment that followed. Think of it like this. If you try to draw a straight vertical line on a piece of paper that is crooked on the table, your line will be straight on the paper but tilted in reality. The ancient builders understood this fundamental truth. Their celestial sightlines, their soaring vertical axes, their precise angles, all depended entirely on this first perfect horizontal. It was the stable Earth from which they could reliably measure the moving sky. This work required a different kind of genius, one that thought in terms of water, weight, and friction. It shows that their engineering prowess was holistic. They were not just astronomers who built or builders who glanced at the stars. They were complete visionaries who understood that to capture the harmony of the cosmos, they first had to create a small piece of perfect order here on the ground. The level foundation was their promise to the heavens, a declaration that they were ready to listen. Venus does not follow the steady rhythm of the sun or the moon. It is a wanderer, a brilliant point of light that appears sometimes in the western sky at dusk as the evening star, and other times in the east before dawn as the morning star. To track its looping, a regular path required a different kind of observation altogether. This ninth method, aligning with planetary cycles, represents one of the highest peaks of ancient astronomical ambition. While the sun and moon offered a predictable framework for daily and annual life, the planets were seen as messengers, their movements believed to herald events of great significance, from the fortunes of kings to the timing of sacred wars. Capturing their alignment in stone demanded a society capable of thinking in far longer and more complex cycles. No culture pursued this with more dedication than the Maya of Mesoamerica. Their astronomers, working over centuries, compiled observations so precise they still astonish modern scholars. They recorded the synodic cycle of Venus, the time it takes for the planet to return to the same position relative to the Sun and Earth, as 584 days. They understood that 5 of these Venus cycles almost exactly equaled 8 solar years. This meant that every 8 years, Venus would reappear in the same part of the sky at the same time of year, a grand celestial reunion. This knowledge was not abstract. It was meticulously recorded in bark paper books called codices, like the famous Dresden Codex, which contains detailed Venus tables used for prophecy and ritual timing. This long-term data allowed them to predict the planet's movements generations into the future, and they built this knowledge into their world. At the great Maya city of Chichen Itza, the monumental pyramid known as El Castillo, or the Temple of Kukulkan, is famously aligned to cast a shadow serpent during the equinoxes. But other structures hint at a deeper, more specific dialogue with Venus. The Caracol, an unusual round tower often called the observatory, features narrow slit windows that align with the extreme northern and southern setting points of Venus on the horizon. Another building, known as the Temple of the Warriors, has an alignment that may mark the planet's southernmost rising position. These were not casual observations. To establish such alignments, Maya sky watchers would have needed to track Venus across its entire 8-year cycle, noting its most extreme departures from the sun's path with painstaking care. The motivation was deeply woven into their cosmology. Venus, associated with the god Kukulkan, was seen as a powerful agent of change. Its first appearance after a period of invisibility could be an omen for agriculture, for warfare, or for the legitimacy of a ruler. A temple aligned to its extreme position was a way of harnessing that power, of creating a permanent architectural witness to a moment of celestial portent. This shift from solar and lunar timekeeping to planetary tracking reveals a profound evolution in thought. It shows a culture moving beyond the basic rhythms of nature to engage with the more intricate, seemingly capricious movements of the heavens. They were mapping a more nuanced solar system, seeking order not just in regularity, but in complex patterns that unfolded over lifetimes. Aligning with Venus was an act of both supreme confidence and profound humility. Confidence in their ability to decode the cosmos, and humility before forces they believed directly shaped the fate of their world. This intricate dance with the planets leads us to a final, overarching principle, one that binds all these methods together into a single, coherent vision of the ancient world. Yet those perfect lines we measure today are not always exactly where the builders intended them to be. modern laser theodolites, instruments of almost unimaginable precision, reveal a subtle but telling truth. Many of the most celebrated ancient alignments contain slight deviations, often no more than a few arc-minutes off from true celestial north or a solstice sunrise. For generations, these tiny flaws were either ignored or used to fuel wild speculation about lost superscience. Today, however, archaeologists see them not as failures, but as a new kind of artifact. These minute errors are a precious data set, a whisper from the construction site itself. They tell us what the builders considered good enough. A deviation of 10 arc minutes in a pyramid's orientation is not a mistake in astronomy. It is a testament to the limitations of a stone gnomon and a rope stretched over hundreds of feet. It speaks to the practical tolerance of their society, the point at which the immense cost of achieving another fraction of a degree of accuracy outweighed the perceived spiritual or practical benefit. Some misalignments may have more poetic origins. The foundation of a temple might have been intentionally laid a hair's breadth off a perfect axis to account for the observed gradual shift of the stars over a century, a planned correction for precession. Other offsets could be symbolic, aligning not to the first sliver of the sun, but to its full disk, or to a specific feature of a local mountain sacred to a community's unique mythology. This modern reassessment performs a crucial service. It gently debunks the notion that such precision required otherworldly knowledge or intervention. Instead, it grounds these staggering achievements firmly in the realm of human ingenuity, patience, and collaboration. It reveals engineers and priests working brilliantly within the constraints of their time, with tools that were simple but whose use was mastered to an extraordinary degree. They were not infallible gods but profoundly skilled people. Their goal was not the abstract, sterile perfection of a modern machine shop, but a functional, sacred perfection that served their cosmology and their culture. To call their work near perfect is not to diminish it, but to understand it. It was perfect for its purpose, which was to create a durable, meaningful connection between community, ruler, and cosmos. That a structure built 4,500 years ago with copper chisels and limestone blocks can still startle us with its accuracy is the real wonder. It forces us to ask what truly defines precision. Is it a number on a laser gauge, or is it the longevity of an idea faithfully set in stone for 50 centuries? A column of smoke rising straight into the still dawn air becomes a perfect plumb line against the fading stars. This 10th method reveals that ancient alignment was not always a silent, solitary vigil. For events occurring in the deep twilight before sunrise or after sunset, when the horizon was too dark to see a distant mountain notch but a key star was already visible, fire and smoke provided a brilliant solution. An observer stationed at a temple or shrine could not see the horizon marker miles away, so a second person, a signal keeper, would be positioned at that distant point. Their duty was one of perfect timing. At the precise moment the target star touched the horizon, as calculated by years of prior observation, they would light a prepared beacon. Suddenly, a bright point of fire would pierce the gloom, visible to the main observer many miles away. That flame became a new, artificial star on the Earth itself, a perfect back-sight against which to align the temple's axis. This transformed celestial alignment into a coordinated performance across space, demanding not just astronomical knowledge, but a system of communication and impeccable trust between teams. Smoke added another layer of precision. By lighting a controlled fire that produced a steady, vertical column of smoke, they created a visual reference line that cut through the darkness. An observer could then sight a star as it crossed directly over that smoke trail, ensuring their measurement was taken at the exact moment the star reached its highest or lowest point in the sky, free from the parallax error of looking sideways at a horizon marker. We see echoes of this practice in traditions across the globe. In the Americas, some researchers suggest that signal fires on mesas could have been used to coordinate observations between distant Puebloan sites. In the British Isles, the alignment of certain long barrows with distant hills might have been verified using such fiery signals on significant dates. The social dimension here is profound. This method required a community. It needed runners or signalmen to carry the timing instructions. It required the fuel gatherers and the fire tenders. It turned what we think of as a cold, geometric exercise into a living, breathing ritual of shared purpose. The moment of alignment was not just seen, it was enacted. The fire was lit, the smoke rose, the star was sighted, and a message of celestial harmony was transmitted across the landscape through human collaboration. This illustrates that the engineering of these sites was as much about social organization as it was about astronomy. It was a symphony of coordinated action, where the spark of human cooperation made the faint whispers of the cosmos loud enough for stone to hear. If fire could bridge miles of darkness to capture a star's position, what other sensory tools might they have used to perceive alignments invisible to the eye? A single stick casting a shadow appears in the archaeological record from Egypt to China. The Gnomon's near-universal presence points to a powerful truth. The human mind, presented with the same sun and the same need, will often arrive at the same elegant solution. This simple tool is a prime candidate for independent invention, a classic case of what anthropologists call cultural convergence. When different societies face the same fundamental challenge, like tracking time or direction, they can independently develop remarkably similar technologies. The principle is so intuitive, see a shadow move, mark its path, that it likely sprang up in countless places without any need for communication. This pattern of convergence suggests a shared human genius, a capacity to read the natural world and engineer answers from its most basic elements. Yet the plot thickens when we look beyond the simple tools to the complex ideas they served. The specific geometric ratio of 3, 4, and 5, used to create perfect right angles, appears in ancient Egyptian rope stretching, in the sacred texts of India, and in the traditions of early China. Such a precise mathematical concept, emerging across vast distances, raises a tantalizing question. Was this knowledge carried along the silk and spice routes by traders, scholars, and itinerant craftsmen? The possibility of diffusion, the spread of ideas through contact, cannot be dismissed. Ancient trade networks were not just highways for goods, but for knowledge. A merchant traveling from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley might carry more than spices. He might carry the memory of how his city's temple was aligned, or a clever trick for squaring a foundation using knotted cords. This slow, informal exchange could have seeded advanced concepts across continents, where they then took root and blossomed in unique local forms. To understand which force, independent discovery or shared knowledge, played the greater role, we must look to the profound differences. The night sky over the Egyptian desert is famously clear and stable, perfect for tracking the unwavering circumpolar stars around a fixed pole. Their monuments reflect this, aiming for eternal, unchanging northern stars to guide the pharaoh's soul. Meanwhile, in the humid, often cloud-draped skies of Mesoamerica, the bright wanderer Venus was a more reliable and dramatic beacon. The Maya's intense focus on its complex cycle, building observatories with narrow windows to track its extreme positions, grew from their own environment and a cosmology where Venus was a potent agent of war and renewal. One culture sought eternal stillness in the heavens, the other sought to predict the patterns of a dynamic celestial power. This comparative analysis moves us beyond a simple list of techniques. It reveals astronomical engineering not as a monolithic science, but as a dialogue. It was a conversation between a universal human desire to find order in the cosmos and the specific, local terms of that desire, shaped by mountain horizons, seasonal clouds, sacred stories, and the needs of a king. The methods may whisper of shared inspiration, but the finished monuments shout in the distinct voice of their creators. They show us that connecting Earth to heaven was never a single problem with one solution, but a deeply human question answered in 10,000 beautiful stone-carved dialects. The master astronomer's greatest instrument was not made of wood or stone, but of flesh and mind. After a lifetime spent watching the same stars trace their paths across the dome of night, after decades of marking the sun's slow crawl along the horizon, these individuals developed something beyond mere knowledge. They cultivated a profound, almost subconscious intuition for the patterns of the sky. This was not magic, but the inevitable result of relentless, focused attention. A modern musician can hear a single note out of tune in a symphony. A seasoned sailor can feel a shift in the wind before the weather changes. In the same way, the ancient sky watcher could sense when something in the heavens was not quite right. They could look at a twilight sky and know, from the quality of the air itself, that tonight's measurement of Venus might be distorted by a high, thin haze invisible to anyone else. They could recognize the subtle shimmering of a star low on the horizon, a sign of atmospheric turbulence that would bend its light and throw off a critical alignment. This human judgment was the final, irreplaceable filter. The Gnomon gave a shadow, the Merkhet gave an angle, but the expert eye decided whether to trust the reading. It was the ability to make a subtle correction based on a feeling, a correction that pure mechanics would miss. This trained intuition represents a form of knowledge we struggle to quantify today. It was a synergy of memory, sensory acuity, and pattern recognition honed over a lifetime. The master astronomer did not just calculate where a star should be, they felt where it was, in the same way a potter feels the correct consistency of clay or a painter knows when a color is true. This psychological element transforms our understanding of their precision. It was not a cold, robotic process. It was a deeply human art, a conversation between the observer and the observed. The tools provided the language, but the intuition provided the wisdom to speak it correctly. It reminds us that their greatest achievement was not just aligning stone to star, but aligning an entire human consciousness to the rhythm of the cosmos. This deep, personal harmony with the heavens may be the most significant tool we have lost in our age of digital precision. A building can be designed not just to point at the sky, but to catch a piece of it. The 11th method moves beyond simple alignment to a breathtaking form of architectural theater. Here, the structure itself becomes the astronomical instrument, engineered to produce a specific, dramatic celestial event within its own walls. This is not about marking where the sun rises on the horizon, but about choreographing how its light will travel across a carved stone interior or down a monumental staircase. It is the pinnacle of the craft where geometry, light, and shadow are woven into a single, reproducible miracle. The most iconic example unfolds at the Pyramid of El Castillo at Chichen Itza. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, as the sun sets, a stunning illusion comes to life. The stepped corners of the pyramid cast a series of triangular shadows down the balustrade of the northern staircase. These interlocking shadows connect to form the undulating body of a serpent, appearing to slither down from the temple at the summit to meet the stone serpent head carved at the base. This is no accident of nature. It is a product of meticulous calculation. The angle of the staircase, the precise height and placement of each tier, and the orientation of the entire structure had to be engineered in perfect concert. The builders were thinking in 4 dimensions, planning for the exact angle of the setting sun on 2 specific days of the year, and then designing a facade that would transform that angled light into a sacred symbol. It was architecture as prophecy, guaranteeing that the feathered serpent god Teotihuacan would visibly descend to Earth each equinox, reaffirming the cosmic order before the eyes of the community. Across the Atlantic, in the ancient tombs of Ireland and Scotland, a different but equally profound internal alignment was achieved. The passage tomb of Newgrange, built over 5,000 years ago, features a long, narrow entrance corridor capped by a unique roof box, a small window-like opening above the main doorway. For most of the year, the interior of the chamber remains in deep darkness, but for a few precious minutes around dawn on the winter solstice, a slender beam of sunlight passes directly through this roof box. It travels the full length of the 60-foot passageway to illuminate the central burial chamber in the heart of the mound. At Micho in Orkney, a similar phenomenon occurs, with the setting sun on the winter solstice aligning perfectly with its passage to light up the back wall. The engineering here is sublime. The builders had to calculate not just the horizontal direction to the solstice sunrise, but also the precise altitude of the sun above the horizon on that shortest day. The roof box had to be positioned at exactly the correct height and angle to capture that low, weak winter light and channel it like a laser into the tomb's core. The purpose was clearly ritual, perhaps symbolizing the rebirth of the sun or the illumination of the ancestors' resting place at the year's darkest turn. This method represents the ultimate fusion of intention and execution. It shows that ancient engineers were not merely aligning to an external event, they were creating a new event that could only exist because of their building. The celestial phenomenon was invited inside, made intimate and controllable. It transformed a public calendar into a private, awe-inspiring spectacle, a guaranteed moment of magic engineered into stone. This shift from observation to active staging reveals a final layer of their relationship with the cosmos. They were no longer just students of the heavens, they had become collaborators, using their earthly craft to direct the celestial performance itself. These celestial patterns were not just witnessed, they were calculated. Behind the patient observations and the dramatic stone alignments lay a quiet revolution in thought, the development of mathematical frameworks to predict the heavens. This was the crucial shift from simply watching the sky to modeling its behavior on paper, or in this case, on clay tablets and bark paper codices. While many cultures relied on empirical methods, honed through generations of direct sighting, some began to abstract the cosmos into numbers and equations. This intellectual leap transformed alignment from a reactive art into a predictive science. Consider the Babylonian astronomers working in the Fertile Crescent over 3,000 years ago. They were meticulous record keepers, compiling centuries of data on the motions of the moon and planets. From these endless columns of cuneiform numbers, they discerned repeating patterns. They discovered, for instance, that certain lunar eclipses recur in a cycle of approximately 18 years, a period now known as the Saros cycle. More importantly, they developed sophisticated arithmetic techniques, using sequences of numbers to project these celestial events forward in time. This meant a priest astronomer did not have to wait nervously each month to see if an eclipse would occur. He could consult his tables and know with reasonable certainty when the moon might next darken. This mathematical backing provided a powerful tool for planning rituals and potentially for stabilizing the long-term alignments of temples meant to commemorate such portentous events. It moved their understanding from the specific to the general, from tracking what did happen to forecasting what would happen. This predictive power reached a breathtaking zenith with the Maya astronomers of Mesoamerica. Their fascination with Venus, the brilliant morning and evening star, drove them to calculate its synodic cycle with a precision that defies belief. They determined this cycle, the time it takes for Venus to return to the same position relative to the Sun and Earth, to be 584 days. Modern science calculates it as 583.92 days. The Maya era was less than 1 day over 500 years of observation. To achieve this, they did not have telescopes or computers. They had the observatory of the Caracol, the patience of generations, and a sophisticated Vigesimal number system that included the concept of zero. They recorded this data in their Dresden Codex, creating Venus tables that could predict the planet's appearances and disappearances for centuries into the future. This mathematical mastery had a direct impact on their engineering. It meant the alignments built into structures like the governor's palace at Uxmal, which some researchers believe is oriented to Venus's southernmost extreme, were not guesses. They were the result of precise, long-term calculation. The builders could design the temple based on a predicted celestial position, confident that the cosmos would fulfill its part of the architectural contract on the appointed day, year after year, century after century. This nascent computational thinking represents a profound evolution. It shows that their engineering was supported by an intellectual tradition that sought to understand the underlying rules of the cosmos. They were no longer just mapping the sky, they were beginning to reverse engineer its clockwork. By abstracting the movements of gods and planets into numbers and cycles, they created a repeatable, teachable system. A young apprentice could learn the Venus tables or the Saros cycle calculations. This knowledge could be transferred without requiring the new student to personally witness the full, multi-decade pattern themselves. It institutionalized precision, allowing for the consistent application of astronomical alignment across a vast empire and across generations. This mathematical layer reveals the true depth of their achievement. The stones are the final, silent testament, but the numbers are the living proof of a mind at work. A mind that looked at the beautiful chaos of the night and dared to find the equations hidden within the light. The solstice sunrise gave them their line, but the river gave them their window. For the ancient Egyptians, the act of celestial alignment was not an isolated moment of scientific triumph. It was the starting gun for a vast, seasonal operation. Once the priests had verified the sacred orientation using the sun's extreme position at a solstice, marking the foundational axis in the desert, the real work could begin. But not at any time. The entire monumental endeavor of pyramid construction was locked into an intimate dance with the environment, a rhythm dictated by the sky and the earth in perfect concert. The most critical partner in this dance was the annual inundation of the Nile. Each year, from roughly July to November, the great river would overflow its banks, depositing fertile silt across the floodplain, and just as importantly, rendering farming impossible. This created a massive, available labor force of farmers who are now freed from their fields and in need of work sponsored by the state. The flood was not a disruption to construction. It was the engine that made it possible. But the river's gift was twofold. The inundation also turned the desert margins into a network of temporary canals, allowing the gigantic limestone blocks from distant quarries to be floated on barges right to the very foot of the rising pyramid. The cosmic timing was impeccable. The alignment was set at a solstice, a celestial extreme. Then, in the following months, the floodwaters would rise, bringing both the manpower and the materials to transform that celestial line into terrestrial stone. This meant the entire project, from the astronomer's first mark in the sand to the quarryman's first strike of the chisel, pulsed to a unified seasonal heartbeat. The construction schedule was not arbitrary. It was a direct reflection of the natural and cosmic order the pyramid itself was meant to embody. To build a machine for eternal harmony with the universe, they had to build it in harmony with their own world. The pyramid did not just point to the cycles of the sun and stars. Its very creation was an enactment of those cycles, a three-dimensional proof that heaven and earth moved as one. This deep integration forces us to see these sites not as static monuments, but as the frozen culmination of a living, breathing, seasonal ritual. The stone we marvel at today is the final artifact of a process that was, from its first imagined line to its last placed block, a continuous ceremony. Darkness can make a straight line impossible to see. Within the deep, windowless chambers of certain ancient structures, where not a sliver of sunlight could ever penetrate, the engineers faced a unique challenge. How do you verify the perfect alignment of walls or the symmetry of a room when your eyes are utterly useless? An intriguing, though still speculative, 12th method suggests they may have turned the very air into a measuring tool. They might have used sound in places like the oracle chamber within Malta's hypogeum of Hal Saflieni, a subterranean complex carved from solid limestone over 5,000 years ago. The acoustics are not merely good, they are phenomenally precise. A low voice spoken in certain niches can resonate through the entire chamber, creating a steady, haunting hum that seems to vibrate within the stone itself. Researchers have noted that specific frequencies cause the room to ring with particular intensity, as if the architecture was subtly tuned like a giant bell. This leads to a fascinating hypothesis. In the absolute blackness of such a space, an ancient surveyor could have used sound waves as a form of verification. By standing at a designated central point and producing a sustained tone, perhaps with a drum or a specific chant, they could listen. The way the sound reflected off the walls, the timing of the echoes, and the quality of the resonance would all be affected by the geometry of the room. A perfectly squared chamber would create a very specific acoustic signature. Any deviation in the wall's angle or a slight asymmetry in the dimensions would subtly distort that signature, changing the echo's return or dampening the resonant frequency. It would be a form of acoustic mapping, using the ear to perceive what the eye could not. This idea of multi-sensory verification expands our understanding of their toolkit dramatically. It suggests that precision was not solely a visual pursuit. If they were attuning structures to resonate with specific sounds, it implies an awareness of harmonic principles that bridged architecture, music, and mathematics. The structure would then be aligned not just to celestial harmony, but to a more immediate physical harmony of vibration. While evidence remains circumstantial, the possibility is profound. It paints a picture of engineers thinking in a fully holistic way. They were not just shaping stone to capture light, but potentially sculpting space to conduct sound. In the silent dark, they may have listened for perfection, trusting the echo to tell them when the walls were true. Their stone whispers a question to our silicon age. The methods of ancient engineers are not merely historical curiosities. They are a profound masterclass for our present, offering urgent lessons in sustainability, observation, and resilience. In a world built on extraction and digital abstraction, their legacy stands as a testament to a different kind of intelligence. They worked with the world, not against it. Their primary tools were not mined from rare earth deposits but drawn from the sky itself, sunlight and starlight, endlessly renewable and freely available to all. Their materials were local stone, earth, and water, chosen for durability and integration with the landscape. The pyramid did not fight the desert, it became a part of it. The terraces of Machu Picchu did not conquer the mountain, they danced with its contours, preventing erosion and creating microclimates for agriculture. This is sustainability not as a modern buzzword, but as a foundational design principle. Their work required no fossil fuels, no supply chains stretching across oceans, no batteries that would one day poison the ground. The energy that powered their alignments came directly from the cosmic engine of our solar system, a partnership with the universe that cost nothing and endured for millennia. This stands in stark contrast to our current paradigm, where our most precise technologies are also our most fragile and energy-intensive, dependent on global networks that can fail. Their approach teaches us that true resilience lies in simplicity and a deep understanding of natural, perpetual systems. Perhaps the most humbling lesson is their relationship with time. We live in an era of instant gratification and quarterly reports, where a project taking more than a few years is considered a burden. Their monuments were conceived across generations. The knowledge of a solstice point was not gained in a single season, but through lifetimes of patient watching, with records passed from elder to apprentice like a sacred flame. This intergenerational transfer of precise knowledge created a culture that thought in centuries, not fiscal years. They built for their grandchildren's grandchildren, embedding their values not in fleeting digital code, but in the very bedrock. This long-term vision allowed for corrections, for subtle adjustments as the sky slowly shifted, resulting in structures that maintained their purpose for ages. Our modern crisis of short-term thinking, evident in everything from infrastructure to environmental policy, could find a corrective in this ancient, patient tempo. They prove that high precision does not require complex black boxes. The near-perfect alignment of the Great Pyramid was achieved not with satellites, but with a profound, embodied understanding of shadows, geometry, and celestial cycles. They mastered the principles, not just the instruments. Today, we can operate a GPS without understanding a single law of physics or astronomy. We achieve precision through dependency, not comprehension. Their legacy suggests that the deepest form of technological mastery comes from intimate dialogue with the natural world, from knowing a thing so well you can predict its behavior with a stick and a length of rope. In an era of climate change and digital dependency, their work is a beacon. It shows that creating enduring structures, whether physical or social, requires harmony with fundamental cycles. They did not seek to control the chaotic weather, but to align with the predictable cosmos. They built calendars in stone to adapt to seasonal change, not to deny it. This philosophy of alignment over domination offers a powerful framework for our own challenges. How do we design cities that work with hydrological cycles or energy systems that sync with planetary rhythms? Their stones suggest the answer begins by looking up, by rediscovering the patient art of observation, and by remembering that the most advanced tool we possess is still a mind trained to see the patterns in the world and the wisdom to build in concert with them. From the Gnomon's shadow to the pyramid's perfect corner, this journey reveals a profound truth. Our ancestors did not possess our tools, but they cultivated a different kind of genius, one rooted in deep observation and intergenerational patience. We have walked through 12 methods, from the patient tracking of solstice horizons to the sophisticated geometry of rope stretchers, from the reflective stillness of water levels to the predictive mathematics of Venus tables. Each technique, whether born independently under a shared sun or whispered along ancient trade routes, represents a human solution to a universal question. How do we find our place in the cosmos? Their answer was to build that place, to carve a permanent mark of understanding into the very skin of the earth. These alignments were not magical, but they were miraculous in their own right, born from the disciplined marriage of eye, mind, and hand over centuries. They connected the practical need for a calendar to the spiritual longing for cosmic order, turning engineering into an act of reverence. Today, we navigate by satellites we cannot see, trusting signals we do not understand. Our precision is outsourced to silicon and algorithms. The ancient world's legacy asks us to consider what we might be losing in that exchange. It reminds us of the power that comes from truly knowing a thing, from studying a shadow's path until its language becomes clear, from listening to the stories the stars tell over a lifetime. Their stones stand not as relics of a primitive past, but as timeless monuments to human curiosity and intellect. They prove that with enough patience, even the grandest celestial patterns can be measured with a stick, a rope, and a mind trained to see. If this exploration of our ancestors' cosmic blueprints resonated with you, share your reflections in the comments. Your thoughts help guide our next journey into the profound mysteries of our shared past.